Calls for Boris Johnson to take action against one of his MPs who's accused of groping two men. Chris Pincher has resigned as Deputy Chief Whip after admitting he drank too much and embarrassed himself at a London club. One Cabinet Minister says the full facts need to be determined.
It is so important that we allow the proper authorities to establish absolutely everything that has happened so that we can decide properly what should happen, and with the victims first and foremost and uppermost in our minds.
But Labour says it shows the Tory party is mired in sleaze and that Mr Pincher should no longer be able to sit as a Conservative MP. Also, this lunchtime, figures just out show a rise of more than 30% in the number of people with COVID in the UK in the last week. A total of 2.3 million had the virus. China celebrates the 25th anniversary of taking Hong Kong back from Britain and claims the territory now has true democracy. Half a century after the first Pride March in London, 1 million people are expected to take to the streets of the capital tomorrow.
And coming up, I'm at Wimbledon, where both Heather Watson and Cameron Norrie are trying to reach the fourth round of a Grand Slam for the first time.
And coming up on the BBC News Channel, a roaring return for James Anderson, who's back taking wickets for England in their delayed fifth test against India.
Hello, good afternoon. Boris Johnson is facing calls to suspend one of his MPs who's alleged to have groped two men. Chris Pincher resigned as Deputy Chief Whip after admitting he had drunk far too much at the Carlton Club, the Conservative Party members' club in London. Well, Labour have questioned why he's being allowed to sit as a Tory MP. They say it shows the Conservative Party is mired in sleaze. Our political correspondent Ian Watson reports.
Are you drowning in sleaze?
After striding the world stage, Boris Johnson's back in Britain and the spotlight has moved onto problems in his own party. One of his closest allies has resigned following serious allegations about his conduct. Chris Pincher worked hard to keep Boris Johnson in office during Partygate. He became Deputy Chief Whip in February and was responsible for party discipline. But his own lack of discipline on Wednesday this week led to this letter of resignation to the Prime Minister on Thursday. Last night, I drank far too much, he says. I've embarrassed myself and other people, which is the last thing I wanted to do. And for that, I apologise to you and to those concerned. I think the right thing to do in the circumstances is for me to resign as Deputy Chief Whip. Chris Pincher was said by witnesses to be drinking heavily at a reception here at this Conservative private members club in central London. But the more serious allegation that came to light is that he groped two men. Downing Street doesn't believe further action is necessary following his resignation and that he can continue as a Conservative MP. But his critics say he should be shown the door. Government ministers insist the allegations are being taken seriously.
All I want to say, and I really want to stress this, is that we take all of these things incredibly seriously. It's, nobody. My first reaction to when I heard this last night was one of sadness and frustration that here we are again in this position. It is absolutely beholden on us to make sure that we do these things properly from the point of view of the victims.
Questions are being raised here at Westminster about the Prime Minister's judgment. Chris Pincher had been cleared of allegations of misconduct back in 2017 following a Conservative Party inquiry. But the BBC has been told that further concerns about his behaviour were raised before he was appointed as a government whip back in February. And the Lib Dems and Labour are now calling for an investigation.
In relation to Chris Pincher, obviously these are allegations at this point, but he himself has apologised for what amounts to, at the very least, poor behaviour. I urge the Conservative Party to think about what it's doing to the reputation of Parliament as a whole, to ensure that if any adequate investigations are carried out swiftly, and if necessary, to consider whether further sanctions should apply.
And two former Conservative ministers, Caroline Noakes and Karen Bradley, have written to Chris Pincher's boss, the Chief Whip, calling for a policy of zero tolerance when any allegations of sexual misconduct are made, and to ensure a thorough investigation is carried out. They add that anyone being investigated in this way should not be allowed to sit as a Conservative MP. You can see why the Prime Minister might not want Chris Pincher to resign. His party lost the Wakefield by-election to Labour a week ago, following the imprisonment of the previous Conservative MP for sexual assault. And the Lib Dems took Tiverton after the Conservative MP there resigned for viewing pornography in the Commons. After a week away, the Prime Minister has returned to another growing political storm at Westminster.
And Ian joins us live now from Westminster. So Ian, Chris Pincher, a very close ally of the Prime Minister. How much pressure is Boris Johnson under over this?
Well, certainly Labour want to make this about Boris Johnson, Ben. What they are saying, in effect, is that Boris Johnson's presided over a series of scandals and therefore he's responsible for deteriorating standards at Westminster. But I think before we get on to Boris Johnson, we have to talk specifically about Chris Pincher. As you rightly say, a close ally of the Prime Minister. He was rallying support for the Prime Minister amongst Conservative colleagues when Boris Johnson looked to be in danger after the Partygate revelations. And certainly Boris Johnson now wants to draw a line under this. Chris Pincher has resigned following these serious allegations, and Boris Johnson wants to be able to move on. But not only the opposition, but some of his own MPs are not allowing him to do so. So two former female ministers have written this letter to the party's Chief Whip today. They're saying there's serious reputational damage being done to the Conservative Party over not just this, but more generally about allegations of sexual misconduct. They're calling for a new code of conduct to be imposed on Conservative MPs. So although the Prime Minister would like to move on, questions are still being raised about how he puts his own party in order.
Ian, thank you very much indeed. Ian Watson there, our political correspondent at Westminster. Now, the latest figures for COVID-19 in the UK are just out, and they show another big rise in the number of infections in the last week. They are up by almost a third, and our health editor Hugh Pym joins me now. So, Hugh, a big jump in the numbers.
Well, that's right, Ben. This survey by the ONS involves regular testing of households and is seen as the most authoritative guide to what's going on. So what does it show? Well, the headline is that 2.3 million people in the UK had the virus last week. That was up 32% week on week. Pretty significant, but it has to be said, still only about half of what it was in late March. And Scotland had the highest rates in the UK. So what about hospital numbers? Well, the numbers in hospital in England, this is the latest data we've got, nearly 9,000, up by 2,500 just in a week. But we just have to be clear again that some of these people, more than half, have gone in with other health conditions and then tested positive. So the number actually where COVID was the primary reason for being there is rather less than that headline figure. It seems that the subvariants of Omicron, known as BA4 and BA5, are spreading more rapidly than previous subvariants of Omicron, and that is fueling this surge. But there's no evidence yet that it causes more severe illness. So there is a bit more pressure on hospitals at a time when they could do without that, and it's certainly the case there'll be more people off work, more staff absences, and that can affect the NHS and social care. But I think right now it's a cautionary note from officials rather than ringing alarm bells at this stage.
All right, Hugh, thank you very much. Hugh Pym, our health editor. Nurses and some pharmacists can now certify sick notes to help reduce the pressure on GPs. The documents, are now called fit notes, provide evidence to employers about a patient's condition and their ability to work. The new system applies to England, Scotland and Wales, with Northern Ireland expected to follow. Now, it is 25 years since Britain ended its rule in Hong Kong and handed the colony back to China. Well, since that handover, critics have accused China of stifling freedom in Hong Kong and suppressing opposition. But China's President Xi Jinping says his country has brought true democracy to the territory. He's been visiting Hong Kong to swear in its new leader. From there, Martin Yip reports.
A day of celebration under bad weather. Just like 25 years ago when Britain returned Hong Kong to China. Beijing promised then to keep the one country, two system principle for at least 50 years after the 1997 handover, meaning Hong Kong would remain part of China but be free to govern itself. Lord Patton was the last governor of Hong Kong and was at the handover ceremony in 1997. He told the BBC that China broke his promise.
Well, the words I spoke then, saying that it was now Hong Kong's destiny to be run by the people of Hong Kong, have turned to ashes, because Hong Kong was once one of the freest, probably arguably the freest and most open society in Asia, and it's now been turned into a police state.
In the past few years, Beijing has cracked down on dissent in Hong Kong, introducing a national security law in 2020 that critics say stifles free speech. Pro-democracy news outlets have also been shut down, and the zero-COVID policy makes life here uneasy.
There are those who are pro-Beijing who are happy, and there are those who are very, very anguished and very worried or even scared. And there are thousands of people, including members of my party, in prison.
Despite a recent overhaul of the election system, the incoming leader, John Lee, was the only candidate to run in this race. Today's ceremonies marked President Xi's first steps outside mainland China for nearly 2.5 years since the start of the pandemic.
You can't quite control the weather, but in Beijing's perspective today, it's all about regaining control over Hong Kong. It's all about the great rejuvenation of the Chinese race, and that's what President Xi Jinping has been talking about.
The practice of one country, two systems has achieved the success in Hong Kong recognized by all since its return to the motherland.
President Xi will be hoping his visit convinces Hong Kongers and the world that stability on these shores following his crackdown in Hong Kong, and that it will usher in a revival of the global financial centre's bruised economy. Martin Yip, BBC News, Hong Kong.
Here, a man accused of murdering a woman in a street attack in East London has appeared at the Old Bailey. 35-year-old Zara Alina was walking in Ilford, 10 minutes from her home, when she was attacked in the early hours of Sunday. Well, this morning, her family paid tribute to her fearlessness and independence. Our correspondent John Donnison has this report.
Zara Alina, the latest young woman to be killed on the streets of London. All week, people have been paying tribute to the 35-year-old law graduate, described by her friends as soft, gentle and a lifeline to her family. This morning, they spoke publicly for the first time since she died.
Zara was incredibly giving, supportive, insightful as to what people needed around her, empathic and fearless. She had the one word that would describe Zara, if I had to use one word, I would say independent. That was what she valued more than anything, her independence.
Zara, her aunt said, was as happy as she'd ever been, having just started a new job at the Royal Courts of Justice in central London.
So she made herself at home, wherever she was. So wherever Zara walked, it was home. That was home for her. Because she knew everybody. Hundreds of people that have come to our house, that have called us, that have sent us letters saying, you don't know me, but we knew Zara.
Police are continuing to appeal for any potential witnesses to come forward. This morning, a 29-year-old man, Jordan McSweeney from Dagenham, was remanded in custody after a court hearing in London. He's been charged with the murder, attempted rape and robbery of Zara Alina. John Donnison, BBC News.
Officials in southern Ukraine say at least 19 people, including a child, have been killed in 2 Russian missile strikes in and around the port of Odessa. The missiles are thought to have been launched from Russian warplanes over the Black Sea, hitting an apartment block and a resort. Moscow has fired dozens of missiles on Ukrainian cities in the last few days. Let's get the very latest from our correspondent in Kyiv, Joe Inwood. And Joe, Russia says it doesn't target civilians, but once again, it is civilians who've died in large numbers.
Yeah, I think that will be difficult to hear for the people of Odessa and the region. At 1 o'clock in the morning last night, 3 missiles hit a resort just to the west of the Black Sea port. A 9-storey apartment building was completely destroyed, and a resort kind of complex was hit as well. 4 people died there, 16 in the apartment block, and the searches are still going on. Now, what's interesting is all this has happened just a matter of hours after Russia was finally kicked off the Snake Island. People will remember this rocky outcrop in the Black Sea. At the start of this war, it was iconic. It was the place where Ukrainian border guards told the flagship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet to go away in rather more florid terms. And ever since then, it's been a key point, both symbolically and strategically. Now, the Russians have said they left voluntarily as a gesture of goodwill. The Ukrainians have released footage that contradicts that quite significantly, showing the island under heavy bombardment. They say they destroyed many Russian pieces of equipment and killed many Russian soldiers, and that the Russians had to leave under fire. Whatever the truth of it, there had been hope here that the Russians leaving Snake Island would have eased the pressure, eased the danger on places like Odessa. But last night, that fear that these attacks were going to continue was realised.
Joe, thank you very much indeed. That's Joe Inwood there, our Ukraine correspondent in Kyiv. The time is just 16 minutes past 1. Our top story this lunchtime. Boris Johnson is under pressure to expel a Conservative MP who resigned from the government after allegedly groping men at a private members' club. And coming up, the financial challenge for people taking on the children of relatives to keep them out of the care system.
Coming up on the BBC News Channel, more from Wimbledon with British hopes falling to Cameron Norrie later. The men's number 9 seed is on centre court as he attempts to make the last 16 at the Championships for the first time.
Well, it's day 5 of Wimbledon, and while Andy Murray and Emma Raducanu may be out, 4 British players are still in the singles tournament, and 2 of them are in action today. Later on centre court, British number 1 Cameron Norrie will take on the American Steve Johnson. But already underway on court 1 is Heather Watson, and our sports correspondent Laura Scott is there for us at Wimbledon, enjoying all the action. Laura.
Yes, Ben. Well, it is the start of the 3rd round today, and we have 2 British players trying to reach the 4th round of a Grand Slam for the very first time. As you say, on number 1 court behind me at the moment is Guernsey's Heather Watson. She's had a bit of a nightmare schedule this week. 2 of her matches have been held overnight. She's also trying to play in the doubles. Today marks a major opportunity for her because she's been coming here since 2010. She's reached the 3rd round 3 times before, but has always come up against really difficult opponents in that round. She's been very open this week about how much she struggled during the pandemic, and she's enjoying what's already her best run at a major for 5 years. She's in action now against Kaja Juvan of Slovenia. It's currently on serve early in that first set. And then at the end of the day on centre court, we've got the 9th seed and British number 1 Cameron Norrie. He's up against the world number 93 Steve Johnson, who's already knocked out a Brit this week and is good on the grass. It is surprising, to say the least, that for a player who's got into the top 10, has had as much success as Norrie has, he's never reached the last 16 of a Grand Slam. He says it's a real priority of his to tick that box today. Before him on centre court, we've got Tunisia's Ons Jabeur and 6-time winner here, Novak Djokovic. And later in the day, take 2 of the Murray-Williams mixed doubles matchup as Venus and Jamie play together.
Quite a day, Laura. Thank you very much indeed. Now, there's a warning today that the rising cost of living is hurting people who take in the children of relatives and keep them out of the care system. Unlike foster carers, they get little or no financial support from the government in England and Wales. Well, as Zoe Conway reports now, charities say it means that some children are at risk of being put into care.
Wendy and her grandchildren have a very special bond. Her daughter was unable to cope with looking after them, so they've lived with Wendy since they were babies. Why do you call Wendy Mum?
Because she does everything like a mum.
What do you mean?
She cooks me dinner, she washes my clothes, she just does everything.
Like many kinship carers, Wendy was told by social services she could not work. Because they're often vulnerable, the expectation is that children need more time with carers.
Had a nice office job and reasonably well paid, and overnight I found myself without a job, not allowed to work, all my pension rights gone, and just a kinship carer.
Wendy gets by on donated food at this community centre. She's noticed the cost of everything going up.
Coffee, a jar of coffee, that had gone up by 50p from 1 week to the next.
If she was a foster carer, she'd be entitled to £137 a week. But there's no such guarantee for kinship carers.
Kinship carers have been struggling financially for many, many years. They don't have the same rights as foster carers to a financial allowance. So many of them give up work, they don't get an allowance, and of course they are plunged into poverty. What's worse now is there is a cost of living crisis, so it's more urgent than ever that the government steps in.
Laura was 27 when she got a call from social services asking her to take in her half-brother and half-sister. Their mother had died.
It was really hard. I went from working 60-hour weeks to working none and doing school runs and doing hair in the morning.
Okay, let's go.
Laura was told by social workers to stop working. The last few years have been a financial struggle. She also now has her own 5-year-old daughter.
Woo-hoo! My children are happy, they're healthy. And if you were to meet them, you wouldn't even know that they were kinship children, and they would probably say that I'm their mum. And we have enjoyed every moment of it, and I wouldn't be anywhere else.
An independent review of social care has recommended that kinship carers are paid the same allowance as foster carers. The government says that later this year it will respond in full to the recommendations, including how to support kinship carers further. Zoe Conway, BBC News.
A Bulgarian woman has been placed onto the FBI's top 10 most wanted list for allegedly running a cryptocurrency scam. Ruja Ignatova, who became known as the missing crypto queen, has been accused of defrauding victims out of more than £3.2 billion. She has been missing since 2017. Police officers in Scotland are preparing to withdraw their goodwill in a dispute about pay. They're not allowed to go on strike. Instead, the action, which will begin at 5 o'clock this afternoon, will include not starting shifts early or taking radio equipment home. The Scottish Police Federation has described it as the most overt demonstration of action in more than a century. Police Scotland says it is committed to seeking a settlement. More than 1 million people are expected to take to the streets of the capital this weekend for London Pride, a celebration of the LGBT plus community. This year's event marks 50 years since the Gay Liberation Front organised the UK's first ever Pride March, paving the way for the gay rights movement. Our LGBT and identity correspondent Lauren Moss has been speaking to some of the group's founding members, and her report does contain some flash photography.
It's 1972. Gay people regularly face arrest, and same-sex attraction is still classified as a mental illness. But in the basement of a London university, a revolution is underway and making itself heard in protests across the capital. In July, Pride in the UK is born.
That first Pride was about visibility.
It was terrifying, daring.
I wanted to change the world, to claim public space for queer people.
We had a mass kiss-in. By the time we'd finished snogging each other, one turned round and the police had completely disappeared.
The GLF lit a spark that would burn for the next 5 decades. But those years also saw huge trials.
So don't die of ignorance.
When AIDS came along, the partners of the ones who died, the family would sweep in and throw them out of the flat or whatever. It was a time of real despair and bitterness.
Progression came later, steps towards righting the wrongs of the past and equality.
Legally, husband.
We march for the right to walk down the aisle.
Pride has undergone many changes over the years. What started off as a protest of around 700 people is now a march of thousands.
Still today, a third of all LGBT plus people in Britain have been victims of homophobic, biphobic or transphobic violence.
The only way you keep rights is by perpetually struggling to keep them. No victory is ever forever unless you make it forever.
Pride as a protest is what united them back then. A desire to keep it alive is what brings them together today. Lauren Moss, BBC News.
Britain's 7-time Formula One world champion Lewis Hamilton has called for some older voices in the sport to be refused a platform. It comes after the former driver Nelson Piquet, who's 69, used a racially offensive term to refer to Hamilton, the sport's only black driver. Well, Hamilton says some older people are trying to say negative things to bring him down. He's been talking ahead of this weekend's British Grand Prix, and our sports correspondent Natalie Perks is at Silverstone for us this afternoon. Natalie.
Well, we should have been talking, of course, about potential record crowds here at Silverstone, or Mercedes struggles, or Red Bull dominance. But as you say, Lewis Hamilton has had to talk again about racism. Now, Nelson Piquet, 3-time world champion, used a racial slur twice in audio that's emerged this week in a podcast in his native Brazil. He was speaking in Portuguese. He's since apologised. He said that word is widely used back in Brazil. But he's faced a chorus of condemnation from across motorsport and from people in his own country. And you could really sense the exasperation of Sir Lewis Hamilton last night when he was talking about this. He talks about the archaic narratives and negativity that he continues to face. The former Formula One boss, Bernie Ecclestone, suggested Hamilton should just brush aside the comments. However, Hamilton responded by saying that we, the media, need to be better at thinking about just who we speak to.
I don't know why we are continuing to give these older voices a platform, because they are, they're speaking upon our sport, and we're looking to go somewhere completely different, and it's not representative, I think, of who we are as a sport now and where we're planning to go. We need to be looking to the future and giving the younger people a platform that are more representative of today's time. It's not just about one individual. It's not about just that one use of that term. It's the bigger picture.
Well, Hamilton's been at the forefront of trying to effect change in Formula One. He and his team, Mercedes, have a partnership together called Ignite, which exists to try and open up the pathways to improve diversity in the sport. But he's frustrated by some within the sport who he says are just paying lip service to the problem and aren't quite putting their money where their mouth is. Meanwhile, Northamptonshire Police have today issued a warning to deter potential protesters ahead of the race on Sunday. It says it's received intelligence that some protesters have could attempt to try and access the track as a form of protest. It's called this plan reckless, and it said that would jeopardise lives. So we'll bring you more on that if and when we get it then.
OK, Natalie, thank you. Natalie Perks there, our sports correspondent at Silverstone. England's cricketers have begun the delayed 5th and final test against India, but it's been held up again, this time, though, by rain at Edgbaston. James Anderson did strike twice before the covers came on, leaving the tourists on 53 for 2. Andy Swiss was watching the action.
Some 9 months after it was meant to happen, at last, England's series decider against India had to be postponed last September because of COVID. Finally, though, the visitors were back, and they clearly meant business. An early flurry of boundaries from Shubman Gill as India began brightly. But since they last met, England have re-found their form.
Gone this time.
Jimmy Anderson with the breakthrough, Gill gone for 17, snaffled by Zach Crawley. How they needed that. The celebration, though, soon turned to frustration. Cheteshwar Pujara was initially given out caught, but replays showed it actually brushed his trouser pocket and the decision was overturned. And there was soon another reprieve for India as England's catching let them down. Hanuma Vihari slipping through Crawley's fingers, but redemption wasn't far away.
Edged, gone this time.
No mistake this time from Crawley. Pujara finally gone, and you could sense the relief. But with India 53 for 2, the Birmingham Brollies went up, forcing this long-awaited match to wait just a little bit longer. Andy Swiss, BBC News.
Well, let's get the weather forecast now. Here's Matt Taylor. And Matt, we're looking ahead to a busy weekend of sport. How is the forecast?
Indeed, I'm sure there'll be a few nervous eyes on the clouds, as there has been so far today. Plenty of showers around, as you've just seen and heard from Edgbaston. Let's take you to Wimbledon, though, first of all, because we've got some showers very close by at the moment, but then things should brighten up. And actually, we could get away tomorrow without any interruptions until we head into the evening. Those showers at Edgbaston, though, should clear. It should be brighter through the rest of this afternoon, but more interruptions expected through tomorrow morning. And indeed, for qualifying at Silverstone, we do expect some rain, particularly during the middle part of the day and early afternoon. Cool for all, as it is out there. We've got the showers at the moment. Heavy and thundery across the north and east of England, parts of Scotland as well. A few more showers further south, but actually bigger gaps between them. Some will stay completely dry across some southern and western parts of England and Wales as we go through into the afternoon. Temperatures, though, not particularly impressive for early July, most around 17 to 19. And we've finished the day with persistent rain across in Northern Ireland. That's going to be affecting Northern Ireland through the evening, then out spread into parts of central southern Scotland, northern England and western parts of Wales as we go through the night and into tomorrow morning. It shouldn't be a desperately cold night, though, out there, even though the days are particularly cool. Temperatures around 9 to 13 Celsius to start the weekend. Here's the big chart, though, for the weekend. Saturday, we've got this hook of a weather system just pushing slowly eastwards across the country. A bit more breeze on it, perhaps, than today. We'll see one weather front stretching from Yorkshire down through towards Cornwall to begin with. Outbreaks of rain or drizzle on that. That pushes its way slowly southwards and eastwards. East Anglia and south east will stay dry until the evening. Then it's back to sunshine and showers for many other northern parts of Scotland. We've got more in the way of persistent rain and cloud through the day. Winds lightest here, more of a breeze further south. That's going to add to the chill out there for this stage in July. Temperatures actually down a little bit on today's values. Now that weather front towards the south and east, as I said, pushes through during the evening, then it clears through as we go through into Sunday. We've still got the dregs of a weather front pushing eastwards on Sunday, bringing quite a bit of cloud across the country at times. A few showers in that, but overall on Sunday, fewer showers around compared with what we'll see on Saturday. Heavies perhaps across some eastern areas later, more in the way of sunshine in the west towards the afternoon. And actually, with winds a bit lighter on Sunday, it should start to feel a bit warmer. Then as we go into next week, it looks like a ridge of high pressure is going to pull its way in. But if we look across the northern half of the country, a northwesterly wind's going to drag in plenty of cloud around at times, could bring in a few showers here and there. That's always going to be the case, and temperatures generally in the mid to high teens. The further south and east you are, though, you're a bit more sheltered from those northwesterly winds, so a better chance of the cloud breaking up at times, and we'll see some sunshine. And we're also going to see temperatures lift a little bit across some southern areas as we go through the week, so it starts to feel a bit more like summer as we head towards the end of the week with temperatures in the mid-20s. Ben.
Matt, thank you very much indeed. Matt Taylor there. And just a reminder of our top story this lunchtime. Boris Johnson is facing calls to suspend his former Deputy Chief Whip as a Conservative MP after allegations that he groped two men at a private members' club. Chris Pincher quit his government post, saying that he had drunk too much and embarrassed himself. And that's all from the BBC News at 1, so it's goodbye from me, and on BBC One Now, we'll join the BBC's news teams where you are. Have a very good afternoon.